Dean Martin was supposed to be doing what he always did best that July day in 1958, stand in front of the camera, look effortless, deliver his lines, and let the legend take care of itself. But the Arizona heat and the dust of Old Tucson had other plans. And when a stunt extra slammed into a window frame that should have shattered but didn't, the illusion of movie magic collapsed in a single sickening crack that echoed across the set, leaving a man named Tommy Mitchell broken on the ground and revealing in one brutal instant how disposable people were in Hollywood if they weren't above the title. While assistants shouted and the medic ran, the studio's instinct kicked in immediately. Remove the problem, reset the scene, keep the cameras rolling, because time was money and a broken stuntman was just another delay to be cleared away. Dean heard it all, the cold instructions, the talk of waivers, the casual certainty that Tommy's hospital bills would ruin his family. And something inside him shifted, quietly but permanently, as he realized that if he stayed silent, he was no better than the machine grinding people down around him. When he told the production manager to reset the scene without him, the set froze, because actors didn't do that in 1958, not if they wanted to keep working. And when threats followed, blacklisting, career destruction, whispered promises that Warner Brothers would bury him, Dean Martin didn't raise his voice or make a speech. He simply stood there and refused to move, forcing everyone else to decide who they really were. Then he turned the moment outward, asking the crew how many of them had been injured and left to fend for themselves. And when hands rose one by one, the truth spilled into the open. This wasn't about one man on the ground. It was about an entire system built on silence. The standoff changed when John Wayne stepped forward and stood beside Dean without saying a word, followed by the director and the crew, until the power dynamic cracked and the studio blinked, agreeing to cover every penny of Tommy Mitchell's care and rethink how they treated the people they depended on, but never protected. Dean didn't celebrate, didn't bask in applause. That night he sat in a hospital waiting room with Tommy's wife, drinking bad coffee and making sure she understood her family wouldn't be destroyed by medical bills, because doing the right thing didn't end when the camera stopped. The studio tried to punish him afterward. Projects disappeared, doors quietly closed, but the story spread anyway, not in headlines, but through grips, gaffers, stunt performers, and extras who finally knew someone with power had used it for them. And within a year, industry rules began to change. Decades later, when Tommy Mitchell said Dean Martin saved his life, he wasn't talking about that fall alone, but about the moment someone famous chose principle over comfort and proved that courage doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like standing still in the heat and saying no, even when everything tells you to walk away. The ripple from that moment didn't stop when the cameras rolled again. It moved quietly through Hollywood like a current you could feel but rarely see, because people who worked on sets began to understand that something had shifted, that the rules they'd been told were unbreakable had cracked under the weight of one man's refusal to look away. And Dean Martin returned to work changed, not louder or more political, just more awake, more deliberate in how he watched the world around him. Crews noticed it first, the way he asked names instead of barking cues, the way he checked on people after long days, the way he made it clear through small gestures that everyone mattered, not just the faces on the posters. Word spread without press releases or interviews, passed from job to job like a secret reassurance, that if Dean Martin was on your set, you weren't invisible. Meanwhile, studios pretended nothing had happened, quietly shelving offers, reshuffling casting lists, reminding everyone who still held the power. But something unexpected happened alongside that quiet retaliation. People kept talking, not journalists or columnists, but workers. And those conversations mattered more. Stunt performers told younger guys about the day a movie star shut down a production to protect one of their own. Grips repeated it over late-night coffees. Assistants carried it forward into their own careers. And the story grew not as myth, but as example. Proof that dignity didn't have to be requested. It could be claimed. Tommy Mitchell's life slowly found a new rhythm after the hospital, learning to live with pain that never fully left, trading physical risk for experience and guidance, becoming someone who made sets safer instead of more dangerous. And every Christmas card he sent Dean wasn't about gratitude alone. It was about shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement between two men that a single decision had redirected an entire life. John Wayne never forgot it either. And when he spoke about Dean afterward, it wasn't with Rat Pack jokes or casual praise. It was with respect sharpened by recognition, the kind that comes when you see someone reveal who they are under pressure, because Wayne knew courage when he saw it, and he knew how rare it was in a town built on compliance. Years later, when insurance policies expanded and protections quietly improved, no one put Dean Martin's name in the paperwork, but everyone who mattered knew where the spark came from, and that anonymity suited Dean just fine, because he'd never wanted credit, only fairness. As the decades passed and Rio Bravo became canonized as a classic, audiences praised performances, direction, dialogue, all the things that survived on screen, unaware that the most important scene had never been filmed, that the real turning point happened in the heat and dust when cameras were idle and careers were on the line. Dean Martin continued to sing, to act, to make people feel lighter for a few hours at a time, but beneath the effortless cool was the memory of that day, a reminder that charm without conscience was empty, and that fame carried responsibility whether you acknowledged it or not. When he aged and the industry changed again, faster and louder than before, the people who'd been there still told the story, not as gossip, but as instruction, teaching younger generations that power wasn't just about leverage, it was about what you chose to protect. And when Dean Martin died in 1995, the obituaries talked about the music, the movies, the Rat Pack mystique, but in quiet corners of Hollywood, in workshops and sound stages and stunt gyms, another version of his legacy was spoken aloud. The version where a man stepped between a system and a stranger and refused to move, where character mattered more than contracts, where being decent cost him something real, and he paid it anyway. That is why the story endures, not because it flatters a legend, but because it offers a blueprint, reminding anyone who hears it that courage doesn't require permission, that humanity doesn't need an audience, and that sometimes the most important role you'll ever play is the one where you stop the show and say, "This isn't right. Not today. Not here. Not while I'm standing here watching." The impact of that refusal didn't fade when the set cooled or when Rio Bravo wrapped, because something irreversible had shifted in the quiet hierarchy of Hollywood. And people who had spent their lives believing they were expendable suddenly understood that power could be challenged if someone was willing to risk everything to do it. Dean Martin never announced what he'd done, never framed it as heroism, but crews remembered, studios remembered, and most of all, the people who worked in the shadows remembered the moment someone finally said their pain mattered. Word traveled the only way it ever truly does in the film business, through lunch tables, loading docks, late-night rap conversations, carried by men and women who had learned to keep their heads down until that day showed them another option. From then on, when a stunt went wrong or a line was crossed, someone would quietly say, "Remember Rio Bravo?" and that was often enough to stop things from going too far. Dean went back to being Dean, the easy smile, the relaxed charm, the guy everyone thought was just coasting through life. But beneath that image lived the knowledge that when it counted, he hadn't blinked. He'd stood in unbearable heat against money, schedules, threats, and tradition, and chosen a stranger over his own safety. Long after box office numbers faded and careers rose and fell, that choice endured, proving that real legacy isn't built in scenes or songs, but in moments when no one expects you to be brave and you decide to be anyway. And that quiet act of defiance echoed far beyond the dusty Arizona set, reshaping how crews looked at themselves and how power was challenged in an industry built on obedience. Because from that day forward, people knew the machine could be stopped if someone brave enough refused to let it keep moving. And Dean Martin carried that moment with him for the rest of his life, never bragging, never claiming credit, simply answering Christmas cards, making phone calls, and living with the certainty that standing up once had given countless others permission to do the same, proving that real legacy isn't measured in box office numbers or applause, but in the lives quietly protected when someone finally says enough.